Welcome everyone to the Haunt Division of Life Intrigued. If this is your first time here, please check out our introductory video, which is linked down in the description. It gives us a little more background about ourselves, as well as any restrictions or disclaimers. In today's video, we're going to talk about how we make our scary beach balls. Boo! Yeah, I know we're better than this. But what we are going to talk about is the pumpkins that we create from those beach balls. This is one of them. And this is one of our larger ones that we created for our pumpkin arch several years ago. Now there's even one even bigger than this that we couldn't get through the door frame. And we'll show you that when we get down in the manufacturing lab. But basically we use the same technique for both these sizes. Just have to have a different size beach ball relative to the size you want to create, and a cardboard frame, which we'll show you how to create in just a minute. So the first thing we need to do is prepare our beach ball for the manufacturing process. Now there are a lot of different techniques that we've seen out on YouTube and the web, etc. But a lot of those require expensive foam materials to create, or require you to leave the actual form inside the pumpkin when you're done, or minimally destroy it. That doesn't work well for us because A, we like to keep things cheap around here, and secondly, we want to mass produce these. So if we have to keep creating a new form each time for each of our pumpkins, that's just not going to work out for us. So we've created a technique that uses standard spray foam insulation. We prefer this LocTite brand because it creates a nice little skin around it, allows us to manipulate it as we put it on. The beach ball, of course, and a cardboard frame that we'll show you how to create in just a minute. But the first thing we need to do is prepare our beach ball. Now I picked these up on the web, Amazon particularly. This is a package of 3. We wanted smaller ones for this new prop that we're doing. So these were advertised as 12-inch beach balls. Now the quality tolerance isn't in the beach ball manufacturing. Of the 3 that we got, they all have different sizes. I'm just glad at this point when I get them out of the package that they're not square. So first thing we need to do is figure out the circumference of the balls. Now each of these again had different ones, but it seems like in the latest videos all required some form of math. So this is the same here today.
Orelli, I'm a tough guy. Tough guys don't do math. Tough guys deep fried chicken for a living.
We're going to take you back to your geometry class, and we're just basically going to use a fabric measuring tape here, find out the diameter of the ball. This one's about 34.5, so if you do the circumference or diameter formula, that diameter is equal to the circumference divided by pi, which means we just basically need to take the 34.5 inches that we measured around the beach ball and divide that by 3.14, and you get just under 11 centimeters, or 11 inches, sorry about that. Now, these are supposed to be 12-inch. Now, there is some variety about how much air you put in it. That'll change the circumference as well. But these 3 balls that we got are definitely different sizes. So the next thing we need to do is mark the midpoint of the ball. Now we're just going to do that easy technique here. Nothing too fancy here. Find out where you think the center is. And then put your measuring tape there. And then follow one of the seams down all the way to the bottom. And this one's about 17 inches. So midpoint of that would be 8.5. So basically I just measured down 8.5 inches at each seam and made a mark. You can see that middle mark here. Now you notice these other 2 lines that we have here. I go 1 inch above that and 1 inch below that midpoint line. So I create those 2 additional lines, again, at every seam around the beach ball. Now the reason for that is that gives us a variety of different sizes and shapes for our pumpkins. We could use the top line here to give us those fat, squat pumpkins. We could use the farthest ones down here, the 1 inch below, to make a more longer, elongated pumpkin. But just basically gives you 6 different sizes and shapes. Everyone knows that in a pumpkin patch, not all the pumpkins look exactly alike, which is one of the reasons that we don't like some of the techniques on the web, is every pumpkin looks exactly the same. In this case, with both the fabrication and using these different lines, we'll get a different size or shape of pumpkin each time. So the next thing we need to do is create the cardboard frame, and to do that, we're going to go down to the manufacturing lab and show you how that's made. We have made it down to our manufacturing lab, which gives us a good chance to show you the pumpkins that we created for our pumpkin arch. These are all made in the same technique that we're going to show you today. Basically just varying the size of the beach ball that we used inside of these to make the form, as well as the cardboard frame, which we're going to show you in just a second here. But it gives you the relative sizes of these pumpkins and know how expensive this would be, especially with this big one if we use that two-part foam, etc. But they've all been covered with a Munster mud covering and painted. So this just gives you a feeling for what we're going to make today. But just to go over the materials we're going to need for this technique, I already mentioned the beach ball. We're going to use the LocTite foam. We prefer this because it gets a nice skin as it dries that we can manipulate. Now, when I went to Home Depot, this is the version that we usually use, this Gaps and Cracks, the standard one. But all the ones at Home Depot we're at, they had pallets of ones that were out of date. So be sure and check the date on the bottom. So we end up having to buy these big gap versions. It cost us $1 more. I think these were 7 something. I think these were 8 something. But they still had a good date. Now we haven't used this big gap version yet, so we're going to kind of learn on the fly here to see what we think of this larger version here. So you'll need that. And we'll have to figure out with this smaller size just how many cans of this we need. We're hoping not very many, or one can will get us through several of these pumpkins to keep the price down. Now we use this mold spray release just to spray it on the beach ball here so the foam will come off easier. The other option you can use is just straight petroleum jelly. Just spread that on there. It gets a little messy though with this, but it still works fine, which is why we use this. But again, you don't need to buy this. Petroleum jelly works just as well. So the next thing we need to do is create the cardboard frame that we're going to stick the beach ball inside of here. But we need to create this cutout of this cardboard that matches the circumference of the beach ball that we measured earlier. Now it's going to be a little bit less. We like to go at least 1/4 inch smaller, just so the beach ball will sit in there tight and not move around. So actually wedge itself in there and keep it out there sturdy while we're putting the foam on it. So we cut that, I think we were a little under 11 inches for the circumference of this beach ball. So we cut this about 10.5, I think, around. But essentially we got a circular cutout. Now there's another line that's 3/4 of an inch further out from that circle. And the reason for that, that's going to set the depth or the thickness of our pumpkin. So when we're creating the foam, we're going to want to stay inside that new outer line, because that's going to make sure that we have a consistent 3/4 of an inch thickness for our pumpkins. We made it super sturdy, put duct tape around the edges just so we could use it over and over. And then we used the shiny piece of cardboard, usually their advertisements or their box descriptions on it. That's a little more shiny, a little more slick, so the foam won't stick to it. So the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and stick the beach ball inside our frame. Now we want the non-nozzle side at the top, just to make that smooth as we're bringing the foam over it. And for this one, I'm going to put it at the lowest line, which is 1 inch below the midpoint. So you can see the top of the cardboard here is right at that lower line that we created earlier in the video. And that's consistent all the way around, so we know that the ball sits perfectly level. We created 2 of these. So we have 2 forms that we can use to create the pumpkin with. We'll create one, put the foam on it, set it aside, let it dry while we're working on the second one. And then when we're done, we can put those 2 halves together and we'll have a full pumpkin. So I now have my 2x4s that allow me to move the beach ball around so I can get foam on the sides without having to go around the table each time. I'm gonna grab my water, spray it for curing, the release spray. We're gonna use this big gap LocTite foam, which I mentioned before. The first thing we need to do is put the release agent on. On your forms, you'll want to mark where each of these seams are. So I'm just going to mark that out here, here, here. You want to go beyond that half or that 3/4 inch outer ring, all the way out in the cardboard at each of the seams. And what this is going to be is where we're going to put the indentations that you see in pumpkins. We're just going to follow those seams, so we need these lines here because the foam's going to cover up the seams. That'll give us a nice uniform spacing of our indents that we want to make as we're fabricating the pumpkin. So I think I've got everything now. Give this a good shake. So here we go. Okay, I'm going to put the stopper in so we can continue using this can. Next thing we're going to do is give it a nice spraying of water just to accelerate the curing of the foam. And as it dries, the LocTite will start creating the skin, and then we'll start manipulating the pumpkin the way we want it and putting in those lines. So we'll just wait here as it dries. If I knew how long that this would take, this is new, I would start the second one. But I want to be careful with this one since it's the first time we use this foam. Make sure it has the same drying time. I don't want to get halfway through the second one and already have this cured up before I can manipulate it. This seems to be skinning about the same rate as the other foam, which gives us a little more time. So the one thing I am going to do here is going to make a glob here, and this will be for the stem. So I'll let that cure just a little bit. Anyway, just about have our skin, a little more than 4.5 minutes. So we'll keep letting that go here. Starting to get that skin on it now, so real lightly touching it first. And we want to bring this bottom into that line that we created, that 3/4 inch line, so we know the thickness. Still not skin enough to start putting in those lines yet. So we'll just continue to work this. If you happen to find yourself with gaps from when you're putting it on, you may have missed a spot or created too big of a gap between the different lines. This is a good time to kind of pat those together, kind of fill in that gap. So I'm just following up where I created that marker out where the seams were earlier. I'm just going to take my fingers and run it down those lines. To give us those traditional pumpkin indentations. Just slowly put those in, not real deep at first. You don't want to thin that out too much, but you want to get those indentations at least started. Looks like this glob here is finally starting to firm up. So I just want to start working it into a stem shape. You may not be able to see that. Dry. Still want to keep pushing this bottom in to that 3/4 inch line. And keep in mind, the one reason we want to do that, make sure that that's uniform there, is because then when we put these two halves together, we want to be the same size, at least the same width. Otherwise, it's going to look a little weird. Okay, this is finally starting to firm up to where we want it. Start getting more manipulation of those lines. It's finally coming together.
There's a new virus in the database.
What's happening?
It's replicating, eating up memory. What do I do?
Type cookie, you idiot.
Got the ball to the lines that I want to use. Again, those bottom ones are the midpoint. Gonna put my release agent on. I'm gonna come back and put some water on it as well, just so that inside cures a little faster. And we are back to the standard gaps and cracks LocTite foam. Okay, same process we did before. Just going to go up the lines. Kind of using the lines of the seams of the ball just to tell me, kind of guide where the line should be. A little more up here at the top. Make that point. And hit it with water to accelerate that curing. Okay, this is working at about 4.5 minutes for the curing time for this can, so I'm going to set a timer.
5 minutes later.
Kind of in between it's drying here, I'm trying to work these stems that we're creating. Just created several of them just to see which one I like the best. Flatten out the bottoms here. Squeeze in the actual stem itself just to give it that look that will eventually then attach on to the top of our pumpkins. See if we can get more of a stem shape for that. And set that aside. See how we're doing. We're starting to get our skin. So that's good. Just now start to work that. Main thing is we got the bottom. I think it's good enough now to start putting in the ridges. Just marching these up where I made those markings. Don't want to be too aggressive on that at first. You don't want to thin it out so much that it'll crack. Just start getting those in there. Just gently putting those in. Keep watching your bottom. Make sure that doesn't get out beyond that 3/4 inch mark that we had. Hit that one more time with water. Gonna let this finish drying, then we'll come back, take them out of the forms, and put them together for the next step. Well, we are just having a horrible time with our camera trying to capture the process of putting the foam on the beach balls. Every time we'd start, the can would fail, and since we can't put the foam back in the can, we had to keep going. Now the good news is, we now have lots of shells for pumpkins. So we'll be able to give you a definite variety of pumpkins when we're done with the end. But we have made 4 shells with the big gap foam. And you can see how really textured that is. Not our favorite look for the pumpkins, but hopefully we can salvage these once we sand them down, kind of clean them up a bit. The other 4 shells we made were just the standard gaps and cracks, which we like much better. Gives a much better, smoother look, more natural pumpkin-y. But again, we'll sand those up just to make those a little better. But it's good to be able to see side-by-side comparison of the 2 different foams that we used. So we're going to pull these out of the forms now. And basically you can see it didn't stick too bad to the cardboard here, thanks to having that water in and that release. So we're just going to deflate the beach ball inside. But you want enough here to give some space that you can kind of pull that beach ball away from the interior of the foam. Just run your hand along the inside here and just kind of use your fingers to pop or to pull the beach ball away from the foam. There we go, it's coming up nicely. And eventually the beach ball should be able to remove from the inside. So there's the inside, nice and smooth for the shell. You can do the same for this one over here. This one deflates on its own. It's probably already deflated, yes. So the air already leaked out of this one during the process of drying, which was good because then it just falls out from that and you get the same shell here. So here's the two shells. Again, the difference, and you can see the insides, pretty similar. But again, you can see how much more textured it is, much more rough than the other one. So the next process is to go ahead and attach the two halves of the shell to make our pumpkin. We're going to do that for all 8 of our shells and produce 4 pumpkins here. It is now time to put the two halves of our pumpkins together. But the first thing we need to do is figure out what the best alignment is of the two shells next to each other. And that's really based on those indentations that we put in when we were building it. We want to try to find the best match of that with the lower half. So I'm just going to move this around a bit until I get a nice alignment of all the ridges, the 5 or so ridges that we put in during the fabrication process. Try to find the best match for each of the indentations. That looks pretty good there, and we're going to mark that. So when we know when we put the foam on, when we put the two halves together, we'll match those lines up so we know we have the best match of our indentations. Here for right now. All the way around the edges. And then put this top half on, matching up with those lines. Trying to get it centered on the bottom pumpkin. And then we're going to give a 4.5 minute cure time so it starts getting that skin on it, and we'll try to shape it around just a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other 3 pumpkins here real quick. Let that sit a little bit while it gets that skin on it, so we can actually kind of start pushing it in. And we are starting to get the skin on, so we can start matching that indentation, kind of filling it in with our hands. Main thing is to get that deep indentation that we made matched up from the two halves. And just trying to smooth out where those came together. We will be sanding this down, so it's not, don't have to get it perfectly matched up, but just try to get it close. And we are done with this phase. The shells are now together. We'll go out, we'll put a sand on here just to smooth these out, just to make them a little more uniform in the pumpkin shape. And we'll take you out to the yard to do the sanding and get on to the next phase of the pumpkins.
Can you move it along? I'm all out of time cards.
Okay, we are back outside now. We're going to do a little bit of sanding. We're going to take care of that seam we made when we put the two halves together. Smooth that out a lot. Just give the pumpkin its general shape. Want to make sure that it can sit flat on the ground. So we'll be flattening out the bottom here and just improving the overall shape. A couple of things to note here. We want to maintain those crevices that we put in while we're putting the foam on, but that's probably your thinnest area because we pressed that in. So you want to be careful not to get in there and cut through that. Now the good news is if something does happen like that, you can just put some more foam in and start over again. It's fine. That's the great thing about being on the foam medium. The other thing is you got about 3/4 of an inch here to deal with. That's because of that outer ring we made. It even expanded beyond that. So you have a lot of material here to get that shape that you want. So I'm not going to subject you to the whole sanding process. Everybody knows how to sand, but I'll just show you a couple to get started, and then we'll show you the finished product when we're done. Wanted to stop and give you a quick update on where we're at. We finished the rough sand on 2 of the pumpkins so far. Just as a reminder, this is kind of what they turned out after the initial creation. Pretty bumpy, etc. So now we put in the rough sanding on it. And this is the regular gap foam. Looks pretty nice. I like the shape coming through. We've got the ridges all the way through that seam. The seam is pretty much gone. Flattened out the bottom. Actually flattened out the top a little bit too. But it looks good. It stays consistently through. I don't see very many holes, if any at all. So real happy with at least at the first rough sanding of this, the first shaping. Just as we suspected, that big gap, more porous, but that porous goes all the way through. I was hoping it was just the outer layer of that, but it wasn't. But so we have at least got the first sanding and shaping of 2 of the 4 pumpkins. So I did want to point out, if you have a lot of material that you want to take off, it's probably going to take a while with sanding that, even with the heavy grit sandpaper. You could use a keyhole saw or this scraper, this foam scraper that I use a lot actually, and take a lot of that off before you ever start sanding. So you can shape with the saw for those big areas, get it pretty close, and then start your sanding, which could save you a lot of time. Again, with the scraping, that'll take a lot of that extra material off, so you don't have to sand all the way through it. But we are now back inside again. Good thing, because it just started pouring outside. So one of the things we did is, you notice on the regular standard gap LocTite that we used, we had really good coverage, not a lot of holes. You can probably see the little black circles. Those were areas that we had to fill in again because there was holes that went all the way through. So we just hit that with foam and resanded that. And you can see the ones with that standard foam came out really well. Now this is the one that I didn't finish sanding because I wanted to show you the big gaps that we had. We actually have giant holes, 3 or 4 of those. Here's one, here's another. And again, that's for this, the more air it must be in that bigger gap. As we started sanding, these holes started showing up, and they're pretty substantial. To show you how to resolve the situation if it happens to you. Now the first thing you need to do is cut out the bottom of this so you can get in there. And there's also a bead, I should mention, that was formed when you put the 2 halves together. Now that you can get into the inside, just rip that bead out. It'll be all the way around where the 2 halves came together. So now that we have this hole in here, we're going to use that foam again. Now I'm just going to use this standard window and door foam. It's the same LocTite brand, just a little different product. And then mainly because it comes in the gun format, so I can just use partial of it, don't have to worry about getting through a whole can. Or get some spray bottle water here to cure the foam. And then if you have wax paper or parchment paper, works really well. I just have these. I have sections built or cut for this, and that's got to be big enough for the hole you're trying to fill. And what we're going to do is we're going to put this parchment paper all the way through, put it up against the hole, and then just put the foam in there so it has something to expand against and to stick and harden. So that's what we're going to do. I want to go through around this shell here and mark areas that I want to fill in on the outside. Now we pretty much know with the big holes here, we definitely want to fill those. But there's probably other little holes. Some I've already filled here, but you may see a few that you want to cover, like this one here. So as soon as I get the inside done with those big holes, I'm going to come back and fill in these ones on the outside. Now maybe find more when I'm doing it, but it just gives me a clue that I definitely want to hit those before I'm done with this particular session. Take this parchment paper, see if I can do this so you can see it, stick it through the bottom in that hole we cut. Put it up against the large hole that you're trying to fill. And just spray that foam right in there. Now you'll want to go a little more than the hole because you're going to be patting it down smooth. So this gives you a little opportunity to do that. The parchment should stay in there. You can take your hand out, take the next piece, repeat that process for the next hole. Put it up against there. Kind of hard to show as I'm doing this. Fill that hole up. I'm going to spray that to accelerate the curing process. Same process. Make sure the hole's good and filled. You're mainly looking for holes that go all the way through. There will be some porous areas, indentations, etc. That'll give the pumpkin some character. And also we'll be able to cover some of that when we do our final coating of this, which we'll use either Monster Mud or foam coat, which will take out a lot of those as well. Mainly concerned about those pieces that go all the way through. I'm going to let this sit here, spray it one more time, especially these ones I caught on the outside. Now you may find yourself, once you fill this and you go back out and start the sanding process again, you may find another hole that comes out from that additional sanding. Just repeat that process and hopefully it won't take too many steps. But again, the great thing about working with foam and spray foam is that if anything's wrong, just do it again. Just keep adding on to it. Works great. Now we're starting to get some skinning. All I'm going to do is just bat that into the hole, tamp that down a little bit so I get nice coverage over that hole. It'll still expand a little bit once I'm done tamping it down, which is fine, but you make sure that it's not too far indented because you're trying to fill that gap. So if it's not filled up enough, you're going to have to come back and fill it again. So just watch what you're tamping. And one more of the big holes, see how it's doing. Looks good. Because the next thing I want to talk about is the stems. So off to the side. Now if you remember when we were creating the shells, the beginning of the shells, I was taking the extra foam we had and creating little piles of it and just kind of bringing that up and shaping it into like a nub. So these are what's going to become our stems for our pumpkins. And it's real easy to then shape this into the stem. Now I've created a few here from the other ones just to save time. You can see here, I'll use this one. I'll be able to stick that right on there on the top, use some spray foam to glue that on there, and probably bring out these little extensions here just to make it more realistic looking. But I wanted to take you through that process because it's kind of cool how that's done. So the first thing we need to do, you can do this with either a hacksaw or if you have a keyhole saw, either works well. Just take the very tip of that off and cut that flat. That'll be the top of the stem. Now from that, see which one here works best. All we're going to do, hope you can see this, is we're going to cut down the side of that stem, and then we're going to smooth it out and thin it out as we go out to the ends of that piece. So all we're going to do, if you can see that, we're going to slice straight down, and then we're going to curve that out and make this as thin as possible. Once we do that, we're going to turn it again. Where that corner meets, we'll make another cut straight down. And then when you get towards that bottom, just shift that out a little bit so it's a nice thin profile as you come off of that slope that you cut at on the stem. Okay, now you should have flat sides all the way around and a much thinner profile here on the outer edge. And I'll draw this next step because it's a little easier to see than trying to watch me do it. But at each of these edges here, from the cuts that we just made, you'll want to make a U cut that comes all the way into that stem and then goes back out along that corner that you created when you're making those straight cuts. So you just want to do that for each of your corners. So if you can see that, these are the edges that were created when we made our cuts, our flat cuts. And then I'm just going in between them and cutting out the extra material on the outside. The last one here. The thinner you get that profile on the outer, the easier this cut will make. I made mine a little thick when I was doing this. So once you do that, you have your straight cuts for the stem, and you have these little extensions that go down the pumpkin, and you have those U shapes in between that. Now the next thing we're going to do is simply put points on these ends right here, just to slim the profile. So I'm just going to take a utility knife, just cut those into points. You do not have to be exact by any means at all, but just try to get those pointed profiles there. And the last thing I want to do is, if it's not really sitting flat, you can just cut off the bottom. And there you have the start of what we're going to use for the stem for each of our pumpkins. Now the other thing I like to do is, if you can bend those things down, that will help fit the profile better of the pumpkin that we put it on. Bring this out. So then this, we're going to put on the top of here. And then we're going to create and extend these profiles when we do that. We're also going to make sure we have a good amount of foam on the top here, so we can, A, this will stick, and B, we can blend it in and give that more realistic pumpkin look. So we can go ahead and do that. So we're going to put this stem on here. I'll try to find the best fit that has on the pumpkin. You may have to turn it around, just whatever looks good. But you want to have these little prongs fitting as flat on there as you can. And you don't have to put it on the top, you can put it on the side. Pumpkins have lots of variety in there. But for this one, I am going to put on the top here. And I'm actually going to mark the position I like on this. So first thing I want to do is put a good amount of foam on the top. And then those lines that I made, those prongs, I'm just going to put a little bit of foam there. And set that right down on top of there. And then I'm going to extend these down just a little bit. Don't have to go straight. Just be creative. Try to get that pumpkin look for the stem. And then you can also, if you want, go up those edges. Trying to show you and do this at the same time, so backwards. And I'm gonna go ahead and show you through this whole one first before I put the other ones on. So we're gonna take the ends of these and get those nice and flush with the pumpkin shell. Take each of these bottom portions here of each of those vines you made and go ahead and flatten that to the pumpkin shell. That'll give the feeling like it's actually growing out of the pumpkin. Do that for each of them. And then just come back and kind of shape them into the stem. Now those gaps in between those, be sure and push that foam back up to the stem. Just continue to shape those and push between those back up to the stem. Try not to make straight lines, give them a little bends, just to add more of that realism. I don't know if you can see that, but we now have the stem on this pumpkin. So we have our first one done. We now have the last pumpkin completely sanded and shaped. I should point out when we're filling these holes, we're really looking for those larger holes that go all the way through the pumpkin. So we want to fix that. In the final phase, when we're doing the covering or the coating of the pumpkins, that would take care of some of those other smaller holes. So we're just focusing on those larger ones in that previous step. So the next phase is probably the most fun you'll have with this whole process, and that's putting the faces on the pumpkins. Now, if you're watching this video, I'm sure I don't have to tell you how to create a pumpkin template and how to cut that out. So I've went ahead and done that for this one. I'm going to go ahead and take this off. And we are done with this template. So here's our face. We know where we want to make the cuts. Now what's the process of going through that? Now there's a number of different things you can use. You can use an X-Acto knife if you want. Hot knife, if you got it, works pretty good. Gives you nice clean cuts on the edges. And then we use the keyhole saw, which is very nice for thick pumpkins. Gets in there really nice. But does use a little more jagged edges as it's cutting. Now we also use this epoxy jewelry drill. This is very, very handy. It's nice and small, fits in your hand, lightweight, has 3 speeds on it. And if you just put a Dremel straight cut blade on that, it's really nice to go through and cut those all out and make it very clean and perfect for those other commercialized pumpkins like Funkins and stuff like that. But for us today, I'm actually just going to use this keyhole saw. It's really quick. I'm pretty happy with that. Cleaned up a bit, teeth look good. There's some little frays and stuff. That's really good for the epoxy drill. Has nice 3 speeds, so just put it on the 2nd speed. And all I'm going in there and just cleaning up those little frays around the cuts on the inside. Try to clean up as much as I could, make the teeth as sharp as I could, clean up any stragglers that were out there. And now we've got the pumpkin face on. It's all carved. It's looking pretty good. Now I went ahead off camera and did the same to the other 3 pumpkins. We're now to the final phase, and that's the exterior coating we're going to apply to these to make them more weatherproof and give them the actual color we want for the pumpkins. Now there are several techniques you can use to finish the exterior of these pumpkins. One is to use foam coat. Puts a nice hard outside layer that you can come back, sand, and then paint. It looks really good. That tends to be a little expensive. and a little overkill for what we're trying to do with these pumpkins. Instead, we're going to use Monster Mud. Now, there are several recipes out on the web. We simply use the mixture of joint compound with exterior latex paint. Now, I always go to the paint section in any hardware store I go to, and I look for the mist tints. They're much, much cheaper, and sometimes you're lucky enough to get a color that's close to what you're looking for. This happens to be a kind of a burnt orange. Works perfectly for these pumpkins. If not, any other color can be tinted to what you want, and they all go down to gray, which is what we use for all of our tombstones and fake walls, etc. So any color works, especially for the gray, because you can always tint that with other colors, black, etc., to get that down to gray. Now, we're lucky enough to have this burnt orange. You probably can't see it on the camera. I'll show it to you in just a little bit. Now, we've already made up the mixture of this for these just to save time. Now, we start with the joint compound. Put a large amount of that into this, whatever size, but we happen to have this 2.5 gallon bucket that we used for mixing. So I'll try to show that. We start with the joint compound, put about a pint of that in at a time, and start mixing it in with the paint until we get the consistency we want. Now, for our consistency, what we're looking for is basically that this will stand straight up, but still easy to mix. So it gives that nice, thick consistency, but still fluid enough that we can coat our pumpkins with it. So we wanted to have these a little more brighter than those pumpkin arch pumpkins. So we kept mixing in straight orange acrylic paint and kept lightening up that color a lot. So I'm going to come around front for the camera to show you this a little better. Just get a nice glop of it. Just start putting it right on. Make sure you get the insides of the cuts nice and thick. Trying to make sure you put it on thick enough to cover up any small holes. Now, what I am going to do on this is I'm going to ahead and do the stem as well, just so it gets that same harder coating on it. And then we'll come back and paint that green part with just straight paint. I went ahead and completed the paint jobs on all 4 pumpkins, but I want to take some time to provide some tips on the actual paint tasks. First of all, you want to make enough of the Monster Mud to make sure you cover all the requirements for your project. Always save a little bit if you can for the next year's, or if you need to do any repairs or touch-ups on the pumpkins. On your first coat, go ahead and really lather that on good. You're trying to cover up a lot of those little holes that you may have missed when you're trying to fill them with a foam, but keep it in there really thick all the way down for that first coat. And I would start with the cutouts first, the face. Just get in there, all the little cutouts and the edges there, and make sure you get those all painted well too. Now, if you need to get into tight places, I actually just split these tongue depressors in half and able to get those in there really nice. Another tip is go ahead when you put that first coat in and paint all the way up through the stem. You're going to come back and paint those with regular paint, but this gives you a nice seal all the way up through the stem and allows you then just to come with normal latex paint or craft paint or whatever, and then just paint in the actual pieces of the stem. Okay, and the next tip is after that first coat, you got it pretty good. There's still going to be holes, I can tell you, that you've missed. There'll be little pinholes all the way through this, or maybe some bigger holes. The easiest way to address that is go ahead and stick a white light underneath the pumpkin. This will immediately show all those little pinholes. Just cover those back up with a paintbrush or use the popsicle stick again to get if you need to get a little more spackling on that. Next up, we actually tried some new paint techniques this time. This time we went ahead and put the light paint on first, the light green, just more brighter, and then came back with a darker green, this velvet green on top of that. The reason we thought it would give us the look that maybe it was drying out from the outside in, so this other part is actually darker. And then you can see the lighter parts that hasn't dried out yet underneath that. And then when we're done, we did come back with that dry brush to actually catch these edges here. And for that, we just took some yellow paint in this same darker green and just kind of swirled it. We didn't mix it. And then took our dry brush just to get these edges. We spent a lot of time creating those when we were making these stems, and we really want to show those off. And the other lessons we learned, actually the first time it's ever happened to us, we were trying to get these to dry a little faster. So I took them outside and put them in some direct sunlight, at least a couple of these in direct sunlight, and then some of these were actually in the shadow. The ones that were in the direct sunlight actually cracked. It looks like that crackling compound you can put on. They have that real nice crackling. So that happened through the whole face, everywhere where that sun was hitting the joint compound, or actually that first layer of paint. So I think it was just drying too fast and then starting to separate. So if this happens or you need to fix it, we just came back with another layer of the Monster Mud, filled in all those cracks, and made sure we didn't stick it out in the sun when it was drying. So the thing we definitely want to put on is a urethane coat. We went ahead and decided to go with gloss, because the Monster Mud itself tends to look a little chalky once it dries. So this kind of brightened that up and give it that nice gloss look on it. So what do you think? Our new 4 pumpkins for a haunted trail this year. This was a fun little project. I hope you enjoyed learning how we make our pumpkins here at Intrigued. Now these smaller ones that we just did took 1 can for each half. So 2 cans basically for each pumpkin here. These took quite a few to get those completely covered. Now for the reveal. I'm going to go ahead and turn these on just so you see what these look like. And there's our 4 new pumpkins. I'll go ahead and hit the lights so you can see how these look in the dark. And that's a wrap for how we create our pumpkins here at the Haunt Department of Life Intrigued. Hope you found some process, technique, or tip that you can use in your own haunt projects. Until our next tutorials, stay calm, haunt on.